Imagine standing in the middle of a great arena, the noise of 1,000 voices echoing around you. On one side, the warriors of reason, the Stoics of Greece and Rome, men like Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca. Their fortress was logic, their weapon was discipline, and their promise was unshakable strength. On the other side, the sages of the East, the Buddhists, led by Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha. Their power was awareness, their practice was compassion, and their promise was unshakable peace. Two worlds, two traditions, separated by continents and centuries, yet both claiming to hold the secret to the same ultimate prize: freedom from suffering. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." And in the same spirit, the Buddha taught, "Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without." Strength and peace. A fortress and an ocean. At first glance, they appear to be opposites. One commands you to stand tall and fight back against the storms of life. The other tells you to surrender, to flow, to dissolve into the vastness of being. And yet, both of these great traditions have shaped how humanity has sought to overcome fear, anger, and despair. But here's the real question. In a world like ours, filled with endless distractions, constant anxiety, and a storm of information hitting us every second, which path actually works? Which philosophy can survive the battlefield of the 21st century mind? This is the Stoic Lighthouse, where ancient wisdom shines on modern challenges. If you seek clarity in the fog of daily life, this is your place. So if you're ready to dive deep into this great clash of philosophies, hit that like button, subscribe, and let us guide you into the heart of this battle for inner peace. Today, we won't just skim the surface. We're going to compare how Stoicism and Buddhism diagnose the human condition, how they define the self, how they train us to handle our emotions, and how they shape the way we act in the world. We'll open their toolboxes, look at their final promises, Eudaimonia or Nirvana, and most importantly, we'll ask, is it possible to take the best from both, or must we choose? This is not just philosophy, this is survival. This is the great battle for the human mind. Number one, the diagnosis, the shared starting point. Before we can truly understand how Stoicism and Buddhism diverge, we need to pause and recognize where they begin exactly the same way. This is the part that shocks most people, because these two traditions, born thousands of miles apart and centuries apart, looked at the human condition and came to the exact same conclusion. Left untrained, our minds are broken. Life, as it is naturally lived, is full of dissatisfaction, frustration, and suffering. According to the Buddha, this was the first noble truth. Dukkha, often translated as suffering. But dukkha is bigger than just pain or loss. It is the gnawing sense that even in moments of pleasure something is missing. You enjoy success, but fear losing it. You experience love, but know it will eventually fade. Even joy is fragile because it is temporary. The Stoics, without ever hearing of Buddhism, diagnosed the same disease. They called it pathos, irrational passions like fear, anger, jealousy, and uncontrolled desire. According to them, these passions rule us, distort our judgment, and trap us in misery. Seneca, who lived through the chaos of Nero's Rome, understood this deeply. He reminded his readers, "The whole of life is slavery. A man must get used to his condition, complain as little as possible, and make the best of what he has." At first, this may sound pessimistic, but like the Buddha, Seneca wasn't trying to depress us. He was offering a sober diagnosis. The human condition, if left on autopilot, is suffering. Both traditions then pressed further. What causes this disease? Buddhism said it plainly. The root is tanha, thirst, desire, clinging to what is impermanent. We want our pleasures to last, our possessions to remain, our youth to stay forever. But they don't. Everything changes. The harder we cling, the more we hurt. The Stoics reached a similar insight through another route. They argued that suffering comes from mistaken judgments. We give massive importance to things we cannot control: wealth, health, reputation, the opinions of others. When these slip away, we collapse. The Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment." And centuries later, the modern Stoic thinker William Burvine reframed this truth for our times. The Stoics advise us to master the art of wanting, not so that we can have everything we desire, but so that we can learn to desire what we already have. So here is the shocking unity. Both Stoicism and Buddhism claim suffering is not truly out there in the world. It is generated inside of us, through clinging, through illusions, through faulty judgments. They both tell us that before we can fix our lives, we must accept this uncomfortable truth. The problem is not the world. The problem is our mind. Number 2, the main battlefield, the nature of the self. If Stoicism and Buddhism agree on the diagnosis, they split radically when they begin the treatment. The battlefield is not the world outside. It is not politics, wealth, or war. The battlefield is the very question, who are you? How each tradition answers that question determines everything that follows. For the Stoics, the self is not only real, but sacred. Inside every human being lies what they called the hegemonikon, the ruling center of reason. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, described this inner core as a fragment of the divine logos, the rational order that governs the universe. To live well was to guard and strengthen this inner citadel, making it so unshakable that no storm from the outside world could penetrate. According to Epictetus, the former slave who became one of history's greatest philosophers, no man is free who is not master of himself. Notice the focus here: mastery, control, discipline. The Stoic does not deny the self. He polishes it like a diamond until it becomes untouchable. Buddhism, on the other hand, flips this entirely. For the Buddha, the very belief in a solid, permanent self is the grand illusion that chains us to suffering. This principle is called anatta, or not self. Look closely enough, meditate deeply enough, and you will find no commander inside your mind, no unchanging essence. What you discover instead is a constant stream, sensations, perceptions, thoughts, and consciousness rising and dissolving moment by moment. As the Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh explained, a wave does not need to look for water. It is already water. We are not the small, fragile wave we call the self. We are the vast ocean of experience itself. The fear of death, loss, or change comes from clinging to the illusion that we are just a separate wave. Liberation comes when we realize we are the ocean. This difference has massive consequences. The Stoic builds the walls of his fortress higher, training his reason to guard against passions and false judgments. The Buddhist dismantles the walls brick by brick until he sees there is no fortress and no prisoner inside. Even modern voices echo this divergence. Sam Harris, neuroscientist and practitioner of Vipassana meditation, points out that careful observation of the mind reveals the self is just a mental construct, an illusion produced by thoughts themselves. So here lies the most profound split. The Stoic path is about becoming an invincible master of the self. The Buddhist path is about realizing there is no self to master. Which of these two truths do we embrace? Do we become generals of an inner fortress, or do we dissolve into the limitless sky? Number 3, facing emotions, control or observation. If the question of the self is the operating system, emotions are the main applications running on it. Both Stoicism and Buddhism agree on one point: unchecked emotions are the primary source of human misery. but their strategies for handling emotions reflect their deeper visions of the self. One trains you to control and redirect them. The other trains you to observe and release them. The Stoic approach is like that of an engineer repairing a system. To Marcus Aurelius, anger, fear, and envy were not mystical curses, but errors in judgment. They were bugs in the code of the mind. The Stoic response was active. Identify the bug, analyze it, and correct it. This required vigilance and logic. Imagine your boss humiliating you in front of colleagues. A Stoic would pause and interrogate the thought, is the insult truly harming me, or is it my judgment labeling it as intolerable? He would then recall the dichotomy of control. What is up to me? My effort, my character, my reaction. What is not up to me? The opinion of others. By reframing the judgment, the emotion loses its grip. Seneca, who devoted an entire essay to anger, warned bluntly, the greatest remedy for anger is delay. That delay is not suppression. It is the gap that allows reason to step in, dismantle the faulty judgment, and disarm the emotion before it seizes control. In this way, the Stoic uses the sword of reason to fight back. Buddhism, however, approaches emotions like a sky watching clouds pass. The problem is not the cloud. The problem is believing you are the cloud. When anger arises, the Buddhist does not dissect it with logic. He observes it with mindfulness. Here is anger. How does it feel in the body? A burning in the chest, a tension in the shoulders. It rises, it peaks, and it fades. By refusing to cling to the story around it, the emotion dissolves naturally. Joseph Goldstein, one of the pioneers of mindfulness in the West, captured this perfectly. Mindfulness is not about getting rid of thoughts, but about not being carried away by them. Even before the Stoics, the Greek philosopher Pythagoras urged his students to review their emotions daily, not for punishment, but for clarity. In this way, both traditions share the goal of inner harmony, but they choose different weapons. So here is the question. Do you want to manage your emotions with the sharp edge of reason, cutting through false beliefs? Or do you want to sit in the stillness of awareness, watching them rise and vanish like clouds? For some storms, you might need a sword. For others, a shield. Number 4, action in the world. The senator and the monk. A philosophy is never just about how we feel inside. It is also about how we show up in the world. And here, Stoicism and Buddhism paint two very different archetypes, the Roman senator and the forest monk. For the Stoics, philosophy was never meant to be practiced in isolation. It was forged in the chaos of the marketplace, the battlefield, and the Senate. They believed virtue had to be lived in the polis, the community. The Stoic concept of officium, duty, meant every person had roles to play: parent, friend, citizen, leader. The true test of philosophy was not on a mountain retreat, but in the arena of daily life. Marcus Aurelius is the supreme example. He was not a hermit, but an emperor, leading armies, making decisions in times of famine and plague, and facing betrayal at every corner. Yet, in the middle of this chaos, he wrote to himself as a reminder, "Do not forget that you are part of the whole. What happens to the whole also happens to you." The Stoic life is therefore active, civic, and engaged. It calls us to be citizens of the world, to take responsibility not only for ourselves, but for the larger community, what the Stoics called the cosmopolis. Buddhism, by contrast, often points to renunciation. The Buddha himself left behind wealth, status, and even his family to pursue enlightenment. The monk in the forest embodies the Buddhist path, a life of withdrawal, meditation, and detachment from worldly concerns. The aim is not to perfect the game of life, but to transcend it altogether. Compassion remains central, but the ultimate goal is liberation from the cycle of suffering and rebirth, not mastery within it. Modern Stoic writers like Kevin Vost highlight this difference. The Stoic sees the world as his city, the cosmopolis, and actively engages to be a good citizen. The Buddhist monastic path traditionally views the world as something to be transcended. Even Plato, who influenced Zeno and the early Stoics, spoke about the responsibility of the philosopher. In the Republic, he described the duty of those who escape the cave of ignorance to return and help others, even if they are mocked or killed for it. This is the Stoic spirit. Wisdom is not for hiding, but for serving. So the tension becomes clear. Should we fully engage in the responsibilities of society, embracing the frustrations of daily life as the arena for virtue? Or should we step back, renouncing ambitions and attachments, seeking a deeper kind of peace away from the noise? Is your battlefield the world or your own mind? Number 5, the toolbox, logic versus meditation. A philosophy only matters if it gives you tools, practical instruments you can pick up when life is crashing down around you. Both Stoicism and Buddhism shine here, offering systems that are not abstract theories but daily practices. And yet, their toolboxes look very different. One is filled with exercises of reason. The other is filled with exercises of awareness. The Stoics built their arsenal around logic, preparation, and perspective. Logic for them was not academic hair-splitting. It was training the mind to think clearly and avoid deception, especially the deceptions we tell ourselves. From that foundation, they developed exercises like the premeditatio malorum, or premeditation of evils. Seneca often advised his students to imagine the loss of their possessions, their health, even their loved ones, not as a morbid game, but as a vaccine against panic when those losses inevitably arrived. Seneca reminded, "He robs present ills of their power, who has beforehand contemplated their coming." Then there was the view from above, an exercise Marcus Aurelius practiced constantly. He would visualize himself rising above the city, then above the empire, then above the earth, until his problems seemed as small as ants on the ground. Journaling was another weapon. Epictetus and later Marcus Aurelius treated their diaries as laboratories of the soul, places to record, dissect, and correct their judgments daily. For the Stoic, the mind is a fortress to be strengthened through constant training. Buddhism, by contrast, fills its toolbox with practices of direct experience. Its Swiss Army knife is meditation. Samatha meditation trains concentration, teaching the mind to rest on the breath, calming the storm of thought. Vipassana meditation then uses this calm to observe reality as it is, impermanent, unsatisfying, and without a permanent self. From meditation flows mindfulness, the practice of bringing full awareness to daily life, whether walking, eating, or listening. The Zen teacher Shunryu Suzuki put it beautifully. In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few. Mindfulness restores us to this beginner's mind, allowing us to see reality with fresh eyes instead of through filters of habit and judgment. And Buddhism also provides an ethical framework, the Noble Eightfold Path, guiding action, speech, livelihood, and thought toward liberation. Modern thinkers have combined these traditions in powerful ways. Tim Ferriss, for example, openly credits Stoicism with helping him make hard decisions and stay resilient under pressure, while using meditation to calm his mind and observe his thoughts without judgment. Tim Ferriss explains, "I use Stoicism as a decision-making system under stress, and meditation to separate myself from my thoughts. The lesson is clear. The Stoic teaches you how to think better. The Buddhist teaches you how to watch your thinking without drowning in it. One is strength training for the rational mind. The other is deep cleaning for the consciousness itself. Together, they form one of the most complete toolkits for mental resilience ever devised." Number 6. The final destination, Eudaimonia versus Nirvana. Every path leads somewhere. Every philosophy holds out a promise of a final destination. For the Stoics and the Buddhists, the goal is the same in spirit. freedom from suffering. But the nature of that freedom could not be more different. It is the difference between perfecting the game of life and walking away from the game entirely. For the Stoics, the ultimate destination is eudaimonia. The word is often mistranslated as happiness, but it means something far deeper: human flourishing, living in complete alignment with your rational nature. To the Stoics, you achieve this not through pleasure or comfort, but through virtue, wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. Aristotle, whose ethics deeply influenced Zeno and the Stoics, described it this way: happiness is the meaning and the purpose of life, the whole aim and end of human existence. But for a Stoic, happiness is not a mood. It is the deep peace that comes from knowing you acted with excellence regardless of circumstance. You could be wealthy or poor, healthy or dying, surrounded by friends or betrayed by enemies. If you lived virtuously, you had already won. Buddhism's destination is something entirely different: Nirvana. The word means extinguishing, like a flame going out. What is extinguished are the three fires that fuel all suffering: craving, aversion, and ignorance. Nirvana is not a heaven to enter after death, but a state of freedom that can be realized here and now. It is the end of clinging, the end of the restless cycle of desire and dissatisfaction. The Dalai Lama described it clearly: the ultimate purpose of life is to achieve peace and happiness. The true source of happiness is not in the external world, but within ourselves. For the Stoic, peace comes from fortifying the self, building a citadel so strong that no storm can break through. For the Buddhist, peace comes from realizing the citadel itself is an illusion, and in dissolving it, you dissolve the fear that held you captive. Think of it this way: the Stoic aims to be a masterful player of life's game. The Buddhist aims to see through the game altogether. Joseph Campbell, the great scholar of myth, might say these are two forms of the hero's journey. One returns from the battle to serve the community with wisdom. The other transcends the battlefield itself. So which destination is right? Do we seek the excellence of character that allows us to thrive in any circumstance? Or do we seek the liberation that comes from abandoning the cycle of clinging altogether? The answer to that question may define not only your philosophy, but the meaning of your entire journey. Number 7, the 21st century hybrid, building your personal system. So after all these comparisons, a question remains: which path should we follow? Should we pledge ourselves to the Stoic fortress or dissolve into the Buddhist ocean? The truth is, we don't have to choose. And in fact, the unique gift of the 21st century is that we can integrate both in ways that Marcus Aurelius or the Buddha themselves could never have imagined. Think about it. Marcus Aurelius never had access to Buddhist sutras. The Buddha never read Seneca's letters. Zeno never meditated in silence on impermanence. They were bound by time and geography, but we live in an era where the collected wisdom of humanity sits in the palm of our hand. This means we are free to become philosophical curators, building personal systems that borrow the best tools from both traditions. How might this look in practice? Use Stoicism as your operating system for the external world. When it comes to your career, relationships, civic duties, and decisions under pressure, the Stoic framework is unmatched. The dichotomy of control, the logic of Epictetus, the courage of Marcus Aurelius, they give you armor and a sword to move effectively and justly in society. At the same time, use Buddhism as your maintenance system for the inner world. When you need to quiet the noise of constant thought, when you feel trapped in patterns of craving or anxiety, Buddhist practices of meditation and mindfulness are the antidote. They are not about conquering the storm, but about realizing you are not separate from it. Tim Ferriss embodies this blend when he says, "I use Stoicism as a system for high-stress decision-making and resilience. I use meditation to calm my mind and observe my thoughts without judgment. Naval Ravikant, the modern philosopher-investor, echoes the same synergy. He urges radical responsibility, a deeply Stoic idea, while also teaching acceptance and presence, hallmarks of Buddhist wisdom. This hybrid approach is not incoherent, it is powerful. It allows you to wake up and journal like Marcus Aurelius, preparing yourself for the day with rational clarity. Then 10 minutes later, sit in silence and watch your breath, as the Buddha advised, learning to observe the impermanence of every thought. You build your Stoic citadel while also realizing through Buddhist insight that the general who guards it is a flow of consciousness, not a permanent self. We are not bound to be Stoics or Buddhists. We can be seekers of wisdom, curating tools from both lineages. In doing so, we are no longer limited by the maps of the past. We hold both a compass and a shield, and maybe that is the true advantage of living in this age, not choosing between the fortress or the ocean, but learning how to sail with both. Two paths, one mountain. We've traveled far. We've seen the Stoic fortress and the Buddhist ocean. We've heard Marcus Aurelius demand that we take command of our reason, and we've listened to the Buddha whisper that peace is found in letting go. One teaches us to master the game of life with virtue and strength. The other teaches us to transcend the game altogether through awareness and compassion. And yet, as different as they are, they both lead us up the same mountain, the mountain of inner peace. The Stoic guide hands us ropes, armor, and discipline. He trains us to climb the rocks, to fight through storms, and to stand tall in the face of chaos. The Buddhist guide tells us to stop fighting the mountain, to recognize its impermanence, and to realize that in truth, we are the mountain itself. Two strategies, two visions, one summit. So the question isn't which path is correct. The wiser question is, what does your life demand of you right now? Do you need the Stoic strength to endure hardship, to make courageous decisions, to resist the pull of distractions? Or do you need the Buddhist's wisdom to dissolve the illusions of fear, to release craving, to sit in the stillness of being? Maybe, just maybe, you need both. But now, I want to hear from you. Which philosophy resonates more with where you are today? Does the Stoic fortress call to you, or does the Buddhist ocean feel like home? Leave your reflection in the comments below, because this isn't just a lecture, it's a community of seekers. If this video gave you clarity, strength, or a new way to see the world, support the Lighthouse. Like the video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. And trust me, you won't want to miss it. Because in our next video, we'll dive into one of the oldest and most dangerous philosophical battles, pleasure or virtue, Epicureanism versus Stoicism, a clash that is not locked in the past, but raging right now inside of you. Do you live for comfort, for pleasure, for escape? Or do you live for strength, for virtue, for purpose? The answer could change not just how you live, but who you become. Remember, every obstacle is not an enemy, but the very path forward. As Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. See you in the next video.